Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. We are in a series on how to start a movement. And so I went out to find people who had started movements and that were making a huge impact in the world. And one of the people that I came across was Wendy Steele. She has an amazing organization, which she started Impact100, and we're going to talk about that here today. And she actually founded this in 2001, and it was in response to feeling as though women's roles in the philanthropy had kind of needed a new way to expand and to be encouraged. And so she launched this organization with the goal of empowering women to see themselves as activists through utilizing large grants to make an impact within their communities. And to date, fast forward, she has, and her organization and all the money that has been collected through her organization has given out grants totaling $80 million to charitable organizations, which is totally awesome. They're around the world. They're in the UK, they're in, of course, in the US, and also in Australia. So Wendy, welcome to Leaders of Transformation. We're excited to have you here today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I am excited to be here.
Yes, and we're also glad to have our listeners here because, of course, you're the reason why we do this podcast. Wendy and I had a great conversation prior to this, and I learned so much about her organization and actually really inspired me with some of the things that I'm planning on doing with the Leaders of Transformation. And the benefit, of course, of doing an interview is that we get to share this with all of you so you can learn about it as well. And so we appreciate you being here. And afterwards, I encourage you, certainly we're going to have links that you can connect with Wendy, and we'll have her links to her website. Also go on leaderstransformation.com and let us know what you're up to and what you're planning to do and how we can help you to do that. We love to hear your stories. You can, of course, follow us on social media as well. All right, so let's dive in. We talk about Impact100. How does it work? What is it? How does it work?
Oh my gosh, it's a very simple model. You gather at least 100 women. They each donate $1,000. They pool all of that money together and announce to their local community how many women they have and therefore how much money they have to give away. The money is pooled in grants with a minimum size of $100,000 and offered to the community in any one of 5 focus areas: education, environment, health and wellness, arts and culture, or family. The idea being that there wouldn't be a nonprofit in that Impact100 region whose mission wouldn't qualify. The nonprofits apply. Women decide how involved they're going to be. They design their own adventure. If they choose to, they can serve on a committee where they'll learn to read an application and vet it, discuss it, do a site visit. Ultimately, those focus areas will narrow down the applicants to 1 finalist in each, and those will go before the membership. 1 woman, 1 donation, 1 vote. The highest vote getter gets the grant, and then we start all over again. So it is an annual commitment from women. It is the goal of every impact organization is to have 500 plus women. That means every year you're giving away one $100,000 grant in each one of those 5 focus areas, which really blankets the community in a powerful way.
That is amazing. And you came up with this idea. What inspired you to do it?
I did. I had relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio after living on the East Coast for a number of years. And I met a lot of amazing women. I learned about all kinds of nonprofits, and there seemed to be a disconnect that I guess I noticed for the first time when I was living there. When I would invite women to come and get involved with me in whatever I was currently engaged in, whether it was a nonprofit in any one of those focus areas, I myself am very much a generalist. So I like nonprofits who are solving great problems, not necessarily in a particular niche. And when I would talk to women, they would tell me all the reasons they couldn't do it. They would tell me that they couldn't justify paying a babysitter so they could come volunteer, or that they couldn't take time away from work, or they traveled too much to be able to make it. And what I heard more often that was probably the most compelling reason was this notion that they didn't have enough. they didn't have enough time, they didn't have enough money, they didn't know enough, they weren't enough. And I knew that they had more than enough. And I knew that the community desperately needed them, needed their hearts, their minds, and their checkbooks. But I knew that the women themselves needed to know what it felt like to go from being on the side of the problem where you're wringing your hands, you're worried about what's facing our neighbors, to that side where you understand that there are solutions and you can be a part of it. I literally got out a spiral notebook in the summer of 2001, wrote down every objection that I had heard from women, every barrier that they faced, and one by one tried to overcome them. And the result is the framework that is now Impact 100. I will say, I thought at the time I was creating something for a very specific community. And what I've since learned is there are women and communities all around the globe who feel the same way that those original women that I spoke to did back in the early 2000s.
So now, how did you get into this whole idea of nonprofits and philanthropy? What's your background? You have a full-time career as well, and this is something you do on the side, or, I mean, this is, I don't know, this probably by now is a full-time thing. It sounds like it's pretty involved.
It is way more than a full-time thing now. What I like to say is that the Impact 100 model is simple, but executing it well is not easy. But I didn't get here through a straight path. It was sort of a winding road. I grew up in a family that we simply had an expectation that we all gave back. You are to leave the world a little better than you found it. And so growing up, that wasn't unusual for me. I was volunteering and helping out. I watched family members do the same. It wasn't that we had great wealth. We simply had a great commitment to do what we could right where we were. And sometimes that was time, sometimes that was talent, and sometimes it was treasure. I was in the banking business, which not very many people today might call that a helping others sort of an occupation, but honestly, for me, it always has been. I served my clients and did everything I could to make their life better, to make that world a little bit of a better place, and always allowed time for community service, community involvement. And when I was having young kids, I stayed home for a little while. I never gave up that community involvement. And when I moved to a new city, the best way I've ever found to really get to know it is to roll up your sleeves and volunteer. Find those nonprofits you like, find the women or men that are your tribe, and get busy, and it can make a big difference. So for a long time, Impact 100 was simply my pro bono work. It was what I did on the side. And the growth has been so incredible and the needs so great. For the last several years, Impact 100 has been my more than full-time vocation.
Now, you mentioned when we were talking previously that 100% of the monies get donated. So this was your pro bono work. And then at some point you mentioned that somebody came along and said, hey, like, this costs money to do this. So talk about that process. I mean, our listeners are aspiring movement makers. Maybe they have something that they've already started, or maybe they're thinking of starting something. And I know that's an issue, right? It's like, okay, well, how can I do this and maybe even do it full time?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I wish I had a better playbook, but I will give you the real playbook of how it went for us, for Impact 100. It was always my pro bono work. I am not independently wealthy, so I've always had to have a full-time job. And the way the Impact 100 model works, it is, in the eyes of the IRS, a pass-through foundation. So that means that all those member dollars that come in, they get pooled together and they get committed to be paid out in grants in the year that our member joins. And so there really isn't money left over, if you will, for administrative expenses. remember that it was designed to remove the barriers. And so one of those barriers can be high overhead. And so with Impact 100, we have none. For me personally, it has meant an evolution. I had been working to keep the lights on, pay the bills, and what my husband likes to say, support my Impact 100 habit. And out of the clear blue, by the grace of God, one day in 2016, I was contacted by a woman named Carrie Morgridge at the Morgridge Family Foundation. She had heard about Impact 100 and she wanted to speak with me. And in our conversation, one of the early questions she asked was, you know, I'm impressed with the model. I love what you're doing, but I don't understand how you get paid. And I laughed and I said, oh, you know, I don't get paid that way. I do this other thing over here and that's how I get paid. And it was a video call and I could watch her face just drop. And so we started talking and she said, you know, what you're doing is not sustainable. And I said, I know, but I have to do it. You know, I have to keep this up. And to make a long story a little bit shorter, she very generously started to support the work at Impact 100 Council. Carrie and her foundation, you know, I often say she gets to see where the puck is going before a lot of the rest of us do. And that is an asset to have on anyone who's going to be on your team. She also is very concerned about the movement. So as committed as she was about the local Impact 100 chapter, which is how she learned about my work, she also understood that this was a movement of global proportion and got very excited to help support the infrastructure that is the Impact 100 Council. So at the council, we exist to support and provide resources to all the chapters. Every book you'll ever read on nonprofit management says that an organization run only by volunteers is not sustainable. Impact 100 chapters have been sustainable in large part because of the support they get from the council, because of conferences and leadership development and grant making that I have been doing through the council and that I have been able to do in a much more significant fashion since the Morgridge Family Foundation started supporting us. And we also now have a variety of other donors who help support us at the movement level, in addition to those wonderful supporters who support their local chapter. I just lost your audio.
There you go.
Yeah.
So Impact 100 is the local movements, and then the council is what is basically leading the movement. And that's what you're saying there.
Right. We would normally do a location tag. So it would be Impact 100 Cincinnati or Impact 100 Palm Beach County, and then Impact 100 Council, if that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you. So how do people find out about this? How do they find out about the chapters locally? How do they get involved at that level? Now you're talking about chapters, so you're talking about people that are going to run those local chapters as well.
Right.
So how does that work? I'm thinking structurally for people who are looking at different possibilities, avenues as to how they can evolve what they're doing.
Perfect. Well, in my case, you know, the reason I developed the Impact 100 model was to remove the barriers that women felt. Very unexpectedly, after our first grant in Cincinnati, People Magazine got in touch with me and they ended up doing a story right away. And that story generated a lot of interest. And when people would contact me and say, I want to replicate your model, can I buy a franchise? Can I license it? You know, I didn't want any financial burden to be a barrier to keep women from being involved. And so from that day straight through till today, Impact 100 is an open source model that's available freely. So if a community wants to bring Impact 100 to their area, the first thing they would do is go on our website, which is impact100council.org. And they can look up to see where all the chapters are, and there may already be one, and they can join. If they want to start one, they reach out to me, and I walk them through some interactive learning modules to help equip them to be able to be successful in running that chapter. So there's no sort of affiliate fee, there's no membership dues as it relates to the chapter and the council. If I had it to do again, I would still do it this way. But understand, or perhaps, you know, those listening to your podcast should understand that it was a very intentional decision based on the outcome I wanted, which was to reduce the barriers to entry. Other people might have different outcomes. And so my best advice is design your structure to best support what you hope to do. Or as Stephen Covey would say in the 7 Habits, you know, begin with the end in mind and then backtrack, because that's how you build what you actually want to build, is if you know what target you're aiming for.
Got it. So the ladies that are part of this, and this is so great and very inspiring, you're just giving me ideas as well. The ladies that are part of it, that are donating the money, and that are deciding on the charities, and you mentioned some of them will go through walkthroughs and that type of thing. Do you educate them on that, on how to do that well, so that they can make quality decisions, or is that something that they come sort of with that previous experience?
That's a great question. We do train them. We provide training for any woman who decides to join one of our focus area teams to do that important work of grant review. We also train our nonprofits because our application looks a little different than some of the others they might be used to, in large part because the size of our grants. But there's something else that happens above and beyond that training. And if you were to look at our membership sort of across, and I'm going to just talk about the United States for a minute. If you look at our membership across the United States, approximately half of our members had never written a check to a single charity for $1,000 or more prior to joining Impact 100. Now, that's not necessarily a reflection of their capacity, but it was a reflection of their experience. The other 50% of the women are what I call seasoned philanthropists. They've written a check for $1,000 in the past. They see Impact 100 as an addition to their portfolio of giving. Well, when those women are newly minted philanthropists and our seasoned philanthropists are all sitting around the table to discuss a grant application, the conversation is robust and multidimensional. Our newly minted philanthropists may know someone firsthand who experienced the very issue that they're looking to eradicate. They may have received those services. They know the community. They know the feet on the street, which bus line it has to be on, which community partner has to be involved in order for it to be successful. On the other hand, our seasoned philanthropist, she has a view from the mountaintop. She knows what's happening in state of the art. What's the cutting edge new ways to make this happen? And we really democratize the conversation here because everyone has a voice, and it is remarkable to hear the stories that come out of those dialogues. Women who become friends who never would have met otherwise, but most of all, decisions that really get executed for the good of the whole community, for the most effective chance at accomplishing whatever the mission is with that particular program or project. And so it's powerful. It's powerful to see what happens when you allow women to be who they really are. You know, when you invite them into this space that they didn't think was open to them in some cases, or that they just didn't understand was so deep and meaningful.
Yeah, I love this. This is great. And the learning that's happening in the process of this and the growth that's happening in the process of this is awesome. Now, let's talk about who these women are. So you mentioned that some of them have never given $1,000 before. Some of them are very well versed in doing this, and it's part of a portfolio that they already have. Is there a demographic of the women that are attracted to this? You must have people at different socioeconomic levels, I'm sure, but sort
Yeah.
of like, what's the commonality?
That's a great question. Our goal is to be as diverse as each community allows. And so we want to be a full reflection. I would tell you that our members span in age from 20 something to late 80s. They typically are from every corner of the geography of that local community, whatever it looks like. We have married, single, no kids, kids, stay-at-home mom, white-collar professional, blue-collar professional. I mean, it is a diverse group. I would say that the sort of sweet spot, if you will, the where the bell curve hits is probably from mid 40s to mid 60s. There's a higher concentration within that age group. Part of that is economic, and part of that is just time management. And it is at that age where if you have children, they're off in school. If you are working outside the home, you have a little more flexibility perhaps in your work schedule, and financially, if you're able to pull it off, you usually in those years you're pretty comfortable with what you can or cannot afford. We do offer enticements for the younger generation. We're very often offering some form of scholarship or young philanthropist program to encourage the younger ones. The truth is that philanthropy or generosity, it's a muscle that we have to learn to use, especially as women. I think there's a lot of misconception around money. And in this country, but I've found it's true in many countries, we don't talk an awful lot about money. And so women, even if they're very well resourced, they're not comfortable. They don't know if they're going to have enough. And so, so we do a lot of work to make sure that women understand their full power and step into that power, not just financially, but intellectually, emotionally, analytically. She brings a lot to the table, but often we get stuck in our lane or in a rut of, this is my one gift, this is what I do, without allowing ourselves the opportunity to recognize that, you're not one trick pony. There's actually all these things that you can do, and you can do in community that would be supportive and nurturing, and also, give you your legs under you so that you learn whatever it is you need to know in order to be really effective.
Mm. Generosity. It's interesting you talk about that as a muscle. I recently had interviewed a financial planner who is a big advocate of generosity and instilling generosity, actually teaching his course, his family, but also his clients how to plan for things to go well. So a lot of times financial advisors will help you to put an emergency fund together, because what if things go wrong? And he said, well, what if things go well? What do you do with that money? And most of the time it just gets spent, and the lifestyle increases. And so he is teaching his clients how to create define that, what they need, and then anything over and beyond that need, not like in survival mode, but in really having the lifestyle, having the investments, doing the things they want to be doing, and then everything else beyond that can go into an abundance fund that can then be used for whatever needs to be. So let's say you have lunch with somebody and they find that they're having some financial challenges, or they hear about a charity locally, or something's going on at school and one of the kids hears that one of the other kids' families having trouble, that kind of thing. They already have the money put aside. They know that's what it's for. And so there isn't this question of, can we do it? Do we need to have a major discussion about it? And so, but we talked about this idea of generosity. I'd love to hear your opinion on this and your experience on this. What he found was that the more generous we are, the more generous we want to be. And we feel good in how that actually spirals, and keeps going. And it's kind of like this ripple effect. And so, and even creating more abundance, there's a mindset to that, of recognizing how abundant we really are because of the fact that we are able to give. It's kind of like psychologically telling us, you're doing good, and you've got abundance, which of course attracts more.
Yeah, I love everything you've just said, and this financial advisor is spot on. What I will tell you that I know about generosity is we are biologically wired to give. So what you were talking about, I refer to it as a spiral, like a seashell you'd find on the beach that keeps growing. But it's based on our bodies. When we are generous, and even, it's really interesting, generosity is contagious. So you don't have to be generous to feel the effects. You can actually see someone who's generous or hear about someone who's generous, and our body produces the hormone, I think, oxytocin. And oxytocin is known as the love or trust hormone. When women deliver babies, they get a blast of oxytocin, and that's what bonds us. We get oxytocin when we shake hands, when we hug. When we're generous, or when we see someone being generous, our body produces oxytocin. It feels good, and your body knows that it's good for you. And so you will be physically encouraged to do more. As you do more oxytocin is brought up. Now, the more oxytocin your body can produce, the better off you are. Because one thing that cannot coexist in our systems with oxytocin is cortisol. And cortisol is the stress hormone. And so if you Google any health problem, any ache or pain, actually, no one should ever do that because it's way too depressing. But if you were to do that, one of the top causes of practically everything that ails us these days is stress. We all walk around in this sort of pressure cooker of stress. You can't be stressed when you're generous. But the reverse is also true. You can't be generous if you're stressed. The cortisol will choke out the oxytocin. And so I will often say that if you're having a tough week, if you're feeling stressful, start thinking about being generous and then go out and act upon it. And you will feel yourself, the tension melt away. You will feel yourself get better, and it will realign your thinking. But generosity does beget generosity. That's why this whole sort of pay it forward. Do you remember the Starbucks line where, I don't know, like 452 people, one after the other, went through the drive-through Starbucks and got their own coffee and then paid for the one behind and the one behind all the way through. And it was getting all this, big attention. It was a big deal until the 452nd car showed up, and that person, unfortunately, it was a man. That man said no. The barista said, for 452 times, someone's been paying, your coffee's been paid for. Do you want to pay for the one behind you? He said no. And she said, really? And he said, no, I don't. Well, he got his name and picture on the cover of the local paper with a headline that said something like least generous man in town. Like if you were his sister, mother, wife, heaven forbid, you would probably be still under the couch. But buried in the story, what it tells you is that what this man did do, he did not pay for the car behind him, but he tipped the women working there something like $100. So he was way more generous than all the people who came before him. But at that time, it didn't feel authentic to him to give an extra $5 for a stranger behind him who, in this case, from his assessment, the stranger didn't need the help paying for the coffee, but all the service people he thought did. And so instead of giving $5 for the one behind him, he gave $100 or more as a tip. And that comes to the authenticity of generosity. So if we're generous to impress our neighbor, or if we're generous to make ourselves look good or to promote ourselves in some fashion, our bodies know better. You don't get the oxytocin. It's not the same chemical reaction. It has to be authentic generosity. And that is what's really powerful. So the more intentional we can be about what we do, when we're giving, the more benefit we have, and the higher the likelihood is that others will see it and understand it and then benefit from it as well.
Wow, I'm so glad you shared that. There's like the light bulbs were going off, and there's a saying in the Bible, like God loves a cheerful giver,
Yeah.
and that it does the heart good, right, to give. And you just gave some scientific background to that as to why that is. And I love that story because there's the obligatory, well, I should do this. And, or people will say, can you give to this, thing? And, I've felt pressured, right? People make you feel guilty. What do you don't want to give to that? Like what you don't care about the dogs or the kids or the this or the that, or the person on the street, and so there's a freedom in that, in saying it's not about being stingy and withholding, but it's about being aligned with it, is what I hear, is being aligned with what you're doing. And that's really, really important. So that is awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
And being intentional, instead of just tossing, signing your name on the pledge card that you sort of feel arm wrestled into, or tossing a donation here or there because you feel it's your obligation. Every time you give, really take a moment and soak it in. And think about it. Be intentional. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or 100 or 1,000,000. Be intentional about every gift you make, and you'll get more benefit. And I'll say one more thing about this. We know from data that the best way for children to grow up to be generous adults is if they see it modeled in the people around them. It doesn't have to be a parent-child or even a family member, but they can learn from teachers, mentors, coaches, neighbors, and certainly family. What we know to be true is that it will also have more sticking power, more likely to allow them to become generous adults if you actually talk about it and you say, I am buying Girl Scout cookies because they're good and they do good. I am putting money in the Salvation Army kettle. I am writing a check to this organization, or volunteering at the homeless shelter, or whatever it is, because I see the need and I'm connected to this solution, and this is all I can do right now, or this is part of this big scheme of things that I give. We don't like to talk about money, and we don't like to talk about giving because it feels uncomfortable or bragging. But it's not. You really want to have these conversations with those younger people in your firm, younger people in your neighborhood, so that they can see what generosity looks like, and understand that is and should be a part of every budget, and a part of every family, and a part of every person's sort of walk through life.
Yes.
And it's serving them as much as then by the ripple effect, it will serve the community they support.
Yes. Well, and I think of when you said about being intentional, it's also about being intentional about educating others, so that otherwise it's only by accident that they learn this. If they don't see it, as an example, then they only do it by accident. If they all of a sudden feel generous and go, wow, that felt good, and then start a new process. But if we wait for that, well, we might be waiting a long time. So that's good. I would love for you, as we wrap up, to share one of your favorite stories of maybe a charity that you gave to and how that impacted them. I'm sure you have lots of stories of favorites. So, but if you just even pick one or two that really stand out.
Oh my gosh, you're right. That's very hard to do. By now we've given away a lot. I'll take you back, I think, to the very first grant that we gave, the very first Impact 100 grant. We had in that first year gathered 123 women who wrote their check for $1,000. And so we asked for applications in all 5 focus areas for a $123,000 grant. And the one that was selected is called the McMicken Dental Clinic, and it's in Over the Rhine, which is a very challenging neighborhood in Cincinnati. And it was a dental clinic for the homeless and the uninsured. They had 5 dental stations, and they had an on-staff dentist by the name of Dr. Judy Allen. And so their application was they needed to replace all 5 dental chairs, and our grant would do that. So it was one of the fastest grants. We will often allow 2 years for the nonprofit to spend our money. In this case, it was like, bam, they ordered the 5 chairs, the check went out the door. And Impact 100 members were invited to come see this sort of before and after. We talk about with our grants, transformation and sustainability. Those are the 2 key elements when we're looking at any grant proposal that comes across our desk. And this was both in spades. So first, as we went into the McMicken Dental Clinic, it turns out that a family foundation had found out about our grant of $123,000. And they knew the dental clinic needed more than just new equipment. And so they gave a grant to put new carpeting and fresh paint on the walls and some office furniture. So the whole place was literally transformed. They had easels up with before and after pictures of their patients. So you see someone with black teeth, missing teeth, who doesn't want to smile. There's no sparkle in their eye, to a full, beautiful white smile. The before and after pictures were startling. And you say, wow, serving more of these patients, allowing these people the dignity of employment and lifestyle. It was transformational from the start, and certainly very sustainable. And so you see these pictures, and then there were before and after pictures of the office, and we saw all the exam rooms, and it was lovely. And as I was getting this tour, Dr. Judy Allen, who is now a dear friend, she called me over into her office space, and she said, Wendy, look at this. And she pointed to the wall. And I said, it's terrific. I love your new office. It looks great. She said, no, I want you to look at the calendar. I looked at the calendar, and it was filled with names. I said, well, good. You're seeing so many more patients. Like, that's awesome. She said, no, you don't understand. She said, for years, I went out into the dental community and I asked for volunteers, because I'm just one dentist and we have a lot of needs. We have a lot of clients, patients. And she said they would nod their head, they would tell me they would come, and they wouldn't come. And she said, those names on the calendar, those are all the dentists who volunteered. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, the dental equipment we had was donated by a dentist when he upgraded his own equipment. And it was about 20 years old. The useful life of dental equipment is about 20 years. So the equipment was unreliable and inconsistent, and frankly, a little dangerous. Judy was used to it, but none of the other dentists in the community would come and do these really serious procedures on people without confidence in the equipment. Now, with new equipment, not only could they rely on that to serve all the people that Dr. Judy could serve, but we now had all these dentists that were coming in. Now, that's what most people call in business an unintended consequence, or the impact of impact. But when you look at what 123 women could do by, for the first time ever, pooling $1,000 each, deciding to give their money to the McMicken Dental Clinic, it was 5 new dental equipment setups. It was through extension, new carpet, new paint, new office furniture, new volunteer dentists. And you imagine the number of people impacted, whether by giving or by then receiving. That ripple effect is hard to mention. And although there are lots of other stories of grants that have very similar sort of outcomes with lots of different audiences, there's something so powerful about, from the very first grant, understanding that when we come together, we can do so much more than the wealthy of us could do all by ourselves, in building community and helping each other, and really shining the light on the solutions out there that are out day in and day out, really facing the toughest issues every community faces and making them better. So I could tell you a million stories, but I will leave you with that one.
That is awesome. And what a confirmation for you and for the ladies, you know, that wow, this really is needed and valued. And yeah, I think that's a great place to end. Oh my goodness. And you slipped in there. One of the things I failed to mention or ask you about what are the criteria. You mentioned transformation and sustainability as the criteria for grants, because there may be some people who are asking that question. What do you look for? But I know all of this is on your website, and I encourage our listeners to go to impact100council.org. That's going to be in our show notes as well. I highly encourage all our listeners and viewers to follow what they're doing. You know, look at it as a case study for maybe something that you want to do. And you know, the great thing about the fact that, Wendy, you're not actually charging for people to start chapters, there's no outlay in that way, that anybody can start it. It's not like there's this huge barrier up front. Anybody can start it. So if somebody's listening and saying, you know what, I just want to do that. Well, you know what, reach out to Wendy, talk to her and her team, and see if there's a good fit in your area, or maybe there's already a chapter in your area. But I believe that leaders of transformation take action. And what better action to take than generosity, right? To be generous, to step out and do something today, even just try it, test out this feeling of, gaining some oxytocin, from being generous to that person who maybe is the cashier or somebody that you run into at the store or on the road or at work or wherever, is to just extend that generosity and see how it feels. And we'd love to hear your stories, and we'd love to hear what you're doing to make an impact in the world. So please go on leadersoftransformation.com, follow us on social media, and let us know. And again, Wendy, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your heart and your passion and your experience.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It was a treat, absolute treat. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I'm just so excited to be able to promote what you're doing. And as I said, you really have inspired me in some of the things that I've been ideas rolling around in my head. So good. This has been great. This has been really, really great. So again, thank you. Thank you to our listeners. And we look forward to seeing you all in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.